Okay, AP family, here we are. We've already done Unit 5 this year when actually during the presidential election. But because we did it sort of different because of that, I just wanted to do a quick review. So I'll have 2 or 3 videos this week just going over things in a nutshell. I am tired. You think you're tired because you're studying for AP exams? It's going to be like that forever. So that's that. I went from teaching to driving an hour to get them to dance, then to baseball, then to dinner, then to all the homework because they're doing virtual school and I'm at home. But I am not going to let you down. So I need to do this too. So here we go. That's just some backstory. If in case I'm stuttering, you know why. All right. So this unit goes through a couple big questions that you want to make sure you can answer. And while these are by no means going to be FRQ questions, if you can go and try to answer these in 1 or 2 paragraphs, it's a really good way to help prepare you for things. So you want to know what type of technological changes impact politicians, how they communicate, and how they behave. Why and how does voter turnout vary? What are the different levels of political participation? And how do you measure which method of political participation is successful in shaping public policy? Remember, we talked a lot about public policy. Was it when we did Unit 5? I don't know. We talked about it. I'm not going to address all these questions tonight, but over the next few videos, keep those in mind. So there's a couple of big ideas you want to think of as well. So these are other good things. Like if you can make a mind map and put these 3 things and then see how many terms can you connect out of this, that would be great. So you want to know how civic participation in a representative democracy, how it drives elections, how it's impacted by all different types of media, how competing policy-making interest is driven by institutions like the media, special interest groups, political parties, all sorts of things, and methods of political analysis, how they're used to measure public opinion. Now, for today's sake, I am going to follow the Barron's book because I know that a lot of you guys download it for free. So this is something you could sort of follow along and connect the dots. I am taking some of the other sources for both the AP and other books, and I just went to make some things a little bit current. If you use the Barron's book, it really only goes up to the 2016 election. And as you might have guessed, a lot of things have changed since then. Like a lot of things happened in politics in the past few years. All right. So let's talk first about political participation. All right. So what is political participation? It gauges how successful political parties are in involving the average citizen, and how can the average citizen get involved. These are the most conventional ways that we've discussed here. How much does the average person discuss politics? Are they registered to vote? How do they vote, right? Do they join a political party? Do they contact their politicians? Do they attend political meetings, whether in person or online, like you saw when I was in that meeting with the congressman this year? Do they contribute to the campaigns either financially or through volunteering? Do they solicit funds for these campaigns, or do they themselves actually run for office? There's some just because you register to vote doesn't mean you're going to vote. I think less than half of registered voters actually vote. So something that is our goal to change, right? So what is the constitutional and legal basis of suffering? Like I said, you're not going to need to memorize every clause of the Constitution, but there's a few really important things you want to keep in mind. So first we have Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1. And that requires each state to allow those qualified to vote for their own legislatures to qualify as well to vote for the House. And you'll see something about that in a second. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 provides for presidential electors to be chosen in each state with the manner determined by state legislatures. So that's just, remember, Article 1 is about what branch? Article 2 is about what branch, right? We should know this. So how are these people getting chosen? Reserved powers. The reserved power clause of the 10th Amendment gives the states the right to determine their voting procedures. Remember, in a federal system, each state does have some different procedures. The 15th Amendment, one of the Reconstruction Amendments that gave freed slaves the right to vote. The 17th Amendment, all right, that's what I was saying. Oh, the other one I said we come back to. The 17th Amendment changed the meaning of Article 1, Section 2, which allows eligible voters to elect senators directly, right? You can vote if you're a voter for the senator. The House doesn't choose them. The 19th Amendment, big one, women's suffrage. I mean, these are all big ones, right? 24th Amendment, outlawed the poll tax. Okay, I was watching a lot of C-SPAN with Ms. Moore today about voting rights in the United States and issues with Georgia and how things are coming before Congress. And they mentioned, in the history about things with poll taxes and all different requirements. 26th Amendment prohibits federal government and state governments from denying the right of 18-year-olds to vote. Right? 18-year-olds can vote. Should it be younger if you're working and they're collecting taxes off you? Something to think about. What if you're 17 and in the military? It happens. I was. All right. The Voting Rights Acts of 1957, 1960, 1965. Notice that's a historical era. It's all happening in a very close period of time. It increased the opportunities for minorities to register and allowed the Attorney General to prevent state interference in the voting process. Another thing they were referring to in Congress today. We have the Reconstruction Amendments. Then it was like almost another 100 years before more progress was made. Okay, also Baker versus Carr, 1962. We went over that one. Think of the one man, one vote, right? And then there were different Supreme Court decisions in the 90s that established gerrymandering resulted in majority minority districts, which was unconstitutional. So we've talked about that a little bit as well. All right, now party identification. There's a little bit of history there. Do you need to know all this history? Probably not. But if you do go in the Barron's book, you can get a little overview there. But in Congress, Democrats dominated both houses from World War II until 1994. That sort of came with FDR and the New Deal and how it gained support. Then in 94, the Republicans gained control of the House and the Senate. Okay. There's a bobcat outside, and I haven't heard it in a long time. But I just heard it. Oh, did you hear that? It's getting warm again. Oh yeah, so there's a bobcat. Yeah, I live in the boondocks. All right, so ticket splitting means that you might vote for one party for, say, president and, say, another party for senator, right? You're not just voting down a party line. And that happens less and less over the past few years. So I wanted to share a graph with you guys from the Pew Research Center. So if a bobcat comes through the window, I apologize for you having to witness this. Voting declines. It is easier for people to vote for the most part now. There's early voting opportunities. Now, not keeping in mind the issues of the pandemic. That's sort of an outlier. But in most states, even more people are registered. But from 1968 onward, that's been a steady decline in voters. The number of people of voting age has more than doubled since 1932. But the percentage of eligible voters is declining. So it's just sort of good to know these trends are happening. And despite this going down, media coverage of elections and politics and voting has increased. So it's sort of not correlating. It's inconsistent, right? Why is these voting numbers going down? A lot of it is a decline in party identification. I think some of this might be updated. I think in the past few years, this might be a little different, to be honest. Distrust of politicians, that probably hasn't changed so much. So like I said, I would think that some of that information should be updated. All right. Suffrage, people usually think of women's right to vote, but think of the suffragist movement. But suffrage is just the legal right to vote. And when you think of the beginning of the Constitution till now, right, there's been all different types of suffrage movements, not literally just for women, right? There's been a long struggle for people of different races to vote, for example. And there's been things being put in place to sort of prevent people from voting. Property ownership, literacy test, poll taxes, and now sort of what we've been talking about with what's going on in Georgia and this stuff. So, when the Constitution was written, it was white male property owners. We're learning in our U.S. history classes right now about the Alien and Sedition Act. So even with those, they were trying to change, if you were an immigrant, how long you had to live here before you could vote, right? So from the beginning of our country, who can vote and who can't vote has been an issue. The 15th Amendment, which would be a Reconstruction Amendment, some ways people were responding with Jim Crow laws. Well, if you're going to allow Black people to vote now, we're going to try to make it hard, and we're going to put in place literacy tests and poll taxes. That says progressive era. That's not a word. It should say progressive era. Those are the 17th and 19th Amendments. Think of women's right to vote. Then we have more voting right legislations by 1954. States, now remember, this is still a federal thing. So states can, as we saw, the country does not all operate voting the same in elections. Each state has their own registration procedures. Each state has their own relationship with voting machines and polling places. But over time, there has been some increased federal oversight. Literacy tests, for example, are outlawed in every state because of the Voting Rights Act amendments of 1970 and other Supreme Court decisions. And to be honest, after what's been happening recently, I wouldn't be surprised if federal oversight increases even more. All right, so models of voting behavior. So there's a few different types here. I'm just going to basically read them for you. But retrospective voting refers to the decisions people make on voting based on how political parties perform, how elected officials perform, or the extent to which an elected administration achieves its goals. So they're worried about, like, what's the outcome? Are these people doing a good job? Right? Rational choice voting refers to voting based on decisions made after considering alternative positions. Like, okay, I sort of like taking retrospective, but then also looking at alternatives and then picking what's best for them. Prospective voting refers to voters deciding that what will happen in the future is the most important factor. So you're not looking at how have they been doing in the past as a party. You're like, well, what do I think they'll do in the future? This is why politicians make promises when they campaign, right? And then we have party line voting. It means you're just going to vote for the same party for every office that the candidates are running for. I'm a Republican, I'm just voting down the line. I'm a Democrat, I'm voting down the line. All right. As of 2014, only 34% of voters consider themselves straight party line people. All right, now, why do people vote? Well, what influences them? I don't know where Hall Street Baptist Church was, but they thought it was important, right, for people to vote. And think of it as the factors that shape people's beliefs, their attitudes, their perceptions, their viewpoints about politics and government, and how voting can maybe change things. So, often you'll hear your family discuss politics. That influences you. Think of family values, right? Schools. Now, schools can't go out and say, hey, vote this way, vote that way, but they do teach you certain values that you pick up that can be influencing you. And hopefully, they sort of also teach you the value of being civic-minded. All right, the church. Think of like the Catholic Church and the Right to Life movement, right? And there's other issues that the church gets involved with. Public opinion and mass media, of course, as well. All right, children especially internalize what they hear and see. And this sticks with people. That doesn't mean that how you felt politically as a child is how you'll be your entire life, but these things do matter and are influential. When I think of schools, also think of like schools and citizenship. The fact that our school says the pledge and the national anthem every morning, which most schools don't, right? That's an example of how citizenship is sort of portrayed and valued at our district. Okay, so influences on voting patterns, right? So not just how do people feel about politics, but do they vote and why do they vote? Demographic patterns are looked every 10 years or so in the census. And what do they notice that influence people? Their age. Usually the older you are, the more likely you are to vote. Socioeconomics, according to this chart, the more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. There's other factors that were also discussed in DC to keep in mind, though. Maybe if you're not making a lot of money, you can't afford a day off to go vote. Maybe you can't afford transportation to go vote. Oh, that bobcat. Ethnicity and gender. Women have had slightly higher rates of voter turnout through men over time, not hugely significant. And ethnicity depends really on state to state, and over time as well. Okay, now we have political parties and the two-party system. Oh my gosh, it's so scary. If you guys can't hear that, you're thinking I'm crazy. All right, so what is a political party? All right, what are they? I mean, you sort of know, but what are they? And what are their functions? All right, they're basically an institution. Right, political parties influence policy making through political action. Right, if you want to put it in a definition. And how the two-party system works. Okay, it's competitive. All right, these parties are an organization. They relate to the electorate and the people, and they do have a role in government. There's nothing about a party in the Constitution, but they've sort of taken on roles from there. They coordinate with each other. They address issues. Right? They act as watchdogs. They nominate candidates. They run campaigns. They try to develop their image or their brand, so to speak. Now, the first party era, you can sort of see in this chart here, that is like the first parties that really developed after Washington's pregnancy. I don't think Washington was pregnant. But the first party era after Washington's presidency, from a little bit, from 1828, that's a few years after his, to 1860, and that's after Washington, that's after Adams. But this was characterized by Democrats dominating both the presidency and Congress. Not the same as the Democratic Party today, as you can see here in this chart that evolved. The second period, which was from 1860 to 1932, sort of think of that as like the industrial age. That was then the Republican era. Then the third, from 1932 to 1968, think of World War II, think of the Depression, FDR, the New Deal, and that was dominated by Democrats, a different Democratic Party by this time. Okay, and then ever since then, it's basically divided government, where one party is controlling the presidency and another one is controlling both houses of Congress. So since 1968, that's sort of been the thing. All right, so party realignment, divided government, and third parties. Party realignment is sort of like shifting party loyalty. I used to be Republican, now I'm a Democrat, vice versa. This occurred, and what happens is not just as an individual, but a party shifts its loyalties. So it's not that I change, it's that the whole party sort of shifts things. This happened in 1932, after the Great Depression. We have Herbert Hoover. People did not like his theories of trickle-down economics, right? There's a reason why those little shanty towns were nicknamed Hoovervilles. So that whole party is like, we just need a whole about face. And they turned to the New Deal policies of FDR, which were completely different, all right? A new coalition of voters were supporting this New Deal of FDR, and that included a lot of different sort of demographics of people, blue-collar workers, people in urban settings, people in labor unions, Catholics, Jews, various immigrants, different minorities, right? All sorts of things like that. And then you have all these different alliances, okay? We talked about divided government then coming about in the 60s. Think of the historical era at the time. Why would people not trust politics? Well, what do you got going on then? You got Vietnam. You got Nixon and Watergate. You got the civil rights movement, which people did not always feel like the government was on board strong enough at first. Okay. Then we have third party influences. Third parties, sometimes called minor parties, but they have played a major role in influencing outcomes of elections. You cannot say that they have not had an effect, because many times they have. These parties are usually smaller, right? Their leaders often realize they don't have a chance to win, but they still wage a vocal campaign, and it usually They're very ideological. People really have a strong value or belief that they stand for. They often focus on really one strong issue. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's something with the economy. Often they're driven by strong personalities, right? It's not just going to be some quiet random person running for the third party. So you have socialist parties, libertarian parties, the Right to Life Party, the Bull Moose Party of Roosevelt, the Populist Party, right? All sorts of different parties. The modern impact of the third party, well, you have some in 1968 with George Wallace, but a big one was someone who died not too long ago. Have to check. Texas billionaire Ross Perot visited here. So this was the 1992 presidential race, and I'll show you some graphs just to show you just how big it was. And he wasn't the last one. Ralph Nader ran for the Green Party, right? He was a big deal back in the day, and he hurt Al Gore's chance of winning. Okay, party organizations, they are, I mean, this is sort of common sense. They are hierarchical, right? They start from like within towns to the wards to counties, states, and national. Primaries help with the national organization. There's national committees. I wanted to give you the heads of the national committees. I'll probably do that in the next video. But I think, what was I going to say in this next slide? Oh, I wanted to tell you that how third parties have not had as big as of impact lately. Ross Perot got double digits in the vote. Joe Jorgensen, who was the third party candidate in 2020, did you even hear them? Less than 2% of the vote. So, all right. I'm going to end this video with interest groups. This is from Khan Academy. That this was a good image down here. It shows you some of the famous interest groups, the NRA, the NAACP, things like that. So, I put here, what are the goals and what interest groups do, right? They are, I'm sorry, I'm a little stumbling here. They are a group that is a public or private organization, affiliation, or committee that has as its goal the dissemination of its members' viewpoints. So they all sort of have like a special interest, right? I think you know what the interest of the NRA is, right? What is the interest of the NAACP? Okay. What is the interest of AARP, right? They try to persuade elected officials to their position. They have a lot of specialized information that they give to legislators, right? They do have criticism, though. They say that they're responsible for gridlock in government because they can't really move things through. And people who donate a lot of money have closer political access to people, and they say that's not fair to the people who can't contribute that kind of stuff financially. All right, so this, like I said, this is a quick overview, but this just goes over the basic structure of things. I'm going to come back a little bit with interest groups in the second part of this quick review, talk about lobbyists, popular versus electoral votes. I think that's important. Some more about primaries and caucuses and campaigning. And then we'll be about done. I am going to also make a video that goes over, again, due process and equal protection under the laws. That was a request. So if you guys have any other requests of certain things you'd like me to go over, please let me know and I will do it as long as I'm not killed by a bobcat. All right. Thanks, guys.